Okay. Okay.
Cool. So rather than starting halfway through a sentence, let me know, Shane, and then yeah, just ask me that again.
All right. You guys are good.
And yeah, keep in mind, Shane, we noticed last time the delay was about a full minute.
Mm.
So if we ask anything of chat, it takes about a minute.
Right. Right.
Okay, it looks like we're live now. I saw myself on there.
All
Okay,
right.
welcome all. Mercury here, and today's a very special Lunatic Live. I have with me, this is for a lot of you out there, you've said that I'm the first person you've seen being so openly bipolar and casual about it, and that's had a big impact on you. So this is the Mercury Black for me, that a decade ago, it was Sascha that served that role in my life. And okay, so yeah, to start with, Sascha was just asking me how I got involved here at sorting myself out. So we're going to start from there and just see where this goes. We will check questions in the chat at some point, but I have no idea when. Okay, so for me, I first became bipolar back in 2006. My first 2 cycles were long, 3 years. And I'm like you, type 1, psychosis, end of the world shit, like locked up against my will, all of that. And coming out of, or in my second cycle, my sister burned me the CD of Christmas with the Victim. It was you guys on some radio station, and you were talking about Icarus, and that for me was a big breakthrough moment. Like before that, I just wanted to kill myself. I did not want to be crazy. I couldn't handle that. Like I couldn't handle the ego death. And you were the beginning of me being able to, where I stopped trying to get back to normal and decided like, okay, I'm a fucking lunatic. Just how do I be the best lunatic I can be rather than being in denial? And years later, and for me, my practice has been very spiritual and lots of meditation, ritual magic and such, which has really helped me. And I reframed my psychosis as a magical tool that's just obviously very dangerous and which initially is hard to learn how to use. But I developed a relationship with my archangel, which I don't know what it is. Like, I have an atheist subpersonality that sees it from the medical model. I have mystic subpersonalities that see it as real. And I don't care, like, to try to define it in that certainty way. I think reality's bigger. So I'd been spending a long time living like with this angel. And its advice always was good. And when it asked me to do shit, I always saw a reason. And someone else was running this channel. So it was my friend Andrew that started this channel. And I came across, when I came across this channel, my archangel told me to subscribe to it and that I would be helping him eventually. And I asked how, and it just said, don't worry about it. You'll know when the time comes. Eventually, he posted a video about magic and comparing something Jordan Peterson, like a famous psychologist, said with something Alan Moore had said about magic. And my angel was just like, yeah, see, like he needs to talk to you. So I reached out to Andrew, just offering to speak private and help him with what he was going through. That led to us becoming friends. He used me kind of like a mentor, and we'd talk about how he was running the channel. Eventually, he wanted to stop doing the channel. And it wasn't built around mental health. His main things were like eating better, losing weight, doing schedules, exercise. But he didn't want to just shut down the channel, and so he asked me to take it over. I was reluctant at first. Eventually, he decided. He gave it to me, and my partner on this is Ryan Holsap, and he's working on his master's in Jungian psychology. So Ryan's sort of the order side of the yin yang for us, and I'm the chaos side. He's working on his doctorate, and I'm the has been locked up lunatic. And from there, it's expanded. And so the community here is not like Icarus. It's, while there's going to be a higher number of madmen and mad folk, schizophrenic, bipolar here than in an average sample, there's also lots of just perfectly normal people working on themselves, or psychologists, psychiatrists. And this has been weird because fucking people have taken me really seriously since I've done the channel in a way I'm surprised by. And so, you know, our framing over at Icarus always of these being dangerous gifts. I'm not at the point where, you know, like so many of us are having to shout that at the people around them, like, stop trying to put me into this illness model. This is a dangerous gift. I've pushed through and gotten to the place where everyone's treating me like I have a gift. And I do private sessions with people. And again, I get suicidal people where I'm talking them through that. But then I get fucking like just really smart, high IQ people, you know, students who are just looking to explore deeper spiritual ideas or psychological ideas with me. And so I've kind of pushed through to the point where I'm working as a lunatic shaman now, sort of, on the channel.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's really inspiring, man.
And it's your fucking fault, like it. And part of what I'm doing here is paying forward what you did for me. Like everything you did building Icarus and like early on, rather than, because, you know, we'd talked over the years every now and then for a while. And the first time I went to Icarus, you were there, and I'd been 2 years with no phone, no internet, no car, isolated in a farmhouse where I just had everything dropped off. So I'd been 2 years of isolation. What motivated me to get an internet connection was after I'd heard you on the Choking Victim CD talking about Icarus. My mom printed off Navigating the Path Between Brilliance and Madness or whatever. And then after reading that, a couple months later, I was ready to get the internet. And the first place I went was Icarus. And I came across you right away. And you and me talked back and forth, and that meant so much to me. And over the years, there were times where I thought to try to express my gratitude to you and just didn't feel you fucking needed it, and instead have just been trying to pay it forward to other people. But so, okay, there might be some new people here because of your name who needed that, but most people will have found that boring and are waiting to find out your story. So let's flip it now. And for the people here at Sorting Myself Out who don't know who the fuck you are, who the fuck are you, and why do I seem so thrilled to have you here?
All right. Well, yeah, so my name's Sasha. I'm in Oakland, California, by the way. I'm 3 hours earlier than you, so the sun is still going down out there. I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in the punk scene in New York City, and that had a really big impact on me because when I was a teenager, after, you know, like after being a kid who never really fit in school and didn't really have friends, I suddenly had like this crew of friends who were all misfits, and I learned from a young age, like, you know, I was part of this radical social movement. So I had this sense of being part of something larger than me. And, you know, one of the important things about the movement I came up in is that we started from the place that society was fucking sick, and that if you thought you were normal, then there was something wrong with you. I mean, that's basically, you know, that's, if you wanted to just like sum it up. And I would say that like the kids I grew up with, a lot of them were kids who ran away from home from other parts of the country and came to live in the squats in New York. And there was a lot of my friends had been through really rough shit, like growing up, and you know, I grew up, I'm like a middle-class kid. I mean, both my parents were like, grew up in the working class. And then in those days, you know, not anymore, but back when my parents were coming up, you could move up from the working class to the middle class. And so I grew up in you know, like on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And my dad died when I was young. and like when I was 13, if folks know anything about Jewish tradition, there's this, you know, the ceremony you go through called a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. And my father died the night before my bar mitzvah. Like, so right as I was turning 13. And that shit fucked me up. That was a rough thing for a kid who was just becoming a teenager through. So, yeah, I mean, who am I? Like, who the fuck am I? Like, I'm a kid that grew up in New York. I grew up in the punk scene. When I was 18 years old, I got locked up in a psychiatric hospital, you know, because I was walking on the subway tracks and I thought that the world was about to end. And I had a lot of ideas about a lot of things, you know, at 18. And I was tuned in to all kinds of stuff, but I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know how to like I had all this power. I didn't know what to do with it. So, I mean, the way you found me was that when I was 19 years old, I played in this punk rock band called Choking Victim. And we, you know, there was this building called C Squat on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and I spent a lot of time there, and we would play, I don't know, we wrote a bunch of songs, and it was like it was a really good thing for a kid who just been, you know, in a psych ward trying to figure out life, to have an outlet like that and to be able to play music. But I ended up doing a lot of really different things. Like so in my family, because I came up in like this middle class family, there was a lot of pressure on me to go to college. I had a lot of pressure on me to be, I don't know, to excel academically. And it was stressful. I don't know if anyone out there is like, you know, had that, gone through that life experience, but that's a big thing that shaped me. And so when I dropped out of college and started riding freight trains and like doing a bunch of other shit that had nothing to do with school, it was like, you know, I was like, you're talking about your relationship to spirituality. For me, like my relationship to spirit came from going out to the desert for the first time. Like I grew up in a place with like a lot of really tall buildings where at night you couldn't even see stars. And the first time I went out to the desert and I saw the night sky, you know, like in all its glory. I mean, I didn't say God because I was raised by, you know, atheists. My dad was a Marxist. But like I just knew, that's when I knew that like this wasn't just about me. I was part of something much bigger. So yeah, anyway, you know, who am I? How did I end up doing the things I did? I spent a bunch of time traveling around the United States and in Canada. I lived in British Columbia for a year and lived on a farm with my girlfriend and learned how to grow food. I lived in Mexico and Central America, and it was like during the time of the Zapatista uprising, and I was like a 21-year-old kid down there in Chiapas, Mexico, like living in a Zapatista village. I, you know, did a bunch of stuff the kind of stuff that you do if you're not worried about dying. I think that's the thing. It's like, you know, like I did a bunch of things that were like the kind of stuff you do if you're like, you don't expect to live for very long and you're just, you live really intensely. And when I was 24 years old, I got my ass locked up in a psychiatric hospital again. And that time I was suicidally depressed. And I thought that, you know, basically I was convinced that I was like, that you couldn't get any lower than me, that I was like the most horrible human being. And that if people really knew how fucked up I was, that no one would have, that I was basically a social leper. And I was obsessed with killing myself. And, you know, that was probably the roughest one. That was the only time, that was probably the hardest time I've ever been through, you know. But getting through that to the other side, you know, like part of what, at the time they diagnosed me with something called schizoaffective disorder, you know, and they gave me a bunch of psych drugs. And at some point, you know, the fucking horrible voices in my head that were telling me to kill myself went away, and I ended up getting my life back together. And then you know, it's funny. I haven't told this story in a good long time. Like I've like moved on to other stuff, but I just feels like the appropriate time. Then I got locked up again in LA County Jail, and you know, and they were holding me down and shooting me up with Haldol in my ass. And when I got out of that situation, I was 25, and they were telling me I was bipolar, and I was doing the research, and I was taking the drugs, and I was like, you know, I don't really trust these motherfuckers. Like, and I definitely don't trust the pharmaceutical companies, but there's definitely something about me that's like different than a lot of other people. Like most people don't think that they're like you know, channeling messianic visions about like how the world is going to end, and so that's when I kind of started to do the research and like talk to more people. And at that time, because I mean, it's nice to be able to talk to you in this like kind of, I think like a lot of people who know about the Icarus Project don't have a context for the punk rock part of it, but like the punk rock part's actually really important. Like that's like the foundational piece of it. Like I had a column in a magazine called Slug and Lettuce back then that was like that was like distributed all around to different, I mean, it went in the prisons in the US, but it also like went to like Malaysia and Brazil and you know, like all over the world. And I would write about gardening because I was like, that's what I was into. And then my friend Sarah Belazikian, who was like who was my traveling partner and who was like a really brilliant young woman, committed suicide. She jumped off a bridge and she was 23 years old. And it was such a heartbreak for me and a whole lot of other people that I started writing about it. I started writing about her, and then I started writing about my own experiences. And like eventually I had a friend who now just won an Emmy. That dude just won an Emmy a couple months ago because he does these PBS Frontline documentaries targeting white supremacists. And it's like his name is A.K.A. Thompson. But back in the day, we lived in a punk house together. Like I was on the top bunk and he was on the bottom bunk, and it was a tiny, you know, like there was a lot of people crammed in that house. And he was working at the San Francisco Bay Guardian, and he said, you know what? You have a really interesting story. You should write your story down and share it. So I wrote the story down, and they published it in the San Francisco Bay Guardian. It was a story. It was like my kind of coming out story, talking about being diagnosed bipolar and the shit that basically the story I just told you. That's the story that I wrote down, and like thousands of
people. Is that the article called Bipolar World?
That's the one.
Like that? Yeah, okay.
That's the one. Yeah. That was like the origin story of the Icarus Project. I wrote that story, and it was like it became like a magnet for all these really interesting people. And like, I ended up getting all this mail. You know, I had an inbox full of messages from people like you who were like, hey, I've never told this to anyone, but like, I thought I was Jesus, and I gave away all my money, and then I was running through the streets, and you know, and one of those people was a 22-year-old queer art student named Jax McNamara, and we started writing back and forth. And then the night we met, we stayed up all night, and we decided to start a website called the Icarus Project. So that's there you go. There's your origin story of the Icarus Project. And what we said was, for people who don't know, Icarus is the boy in Greek mythology who has wings made out of wax and feathers, and he ends up flying too close to the sun, and his wings melt, and he drowns in the ocean. And what we said was, rather than seeing ourselves as diseased and disordered, we see ourselves as having dangerous gifts. And so that's how the Icarus Project started. And it initially was just for people diagnosed bipolar, but then, you know, well, here I have so many. I'm like a book person, you know. But so here's that book you're talking about, Navigating the Space Between Brilliance and Madness. We wrote this thing, and then all these people found us who weren't diagnosed bipolar, and then eventually we just started. Honestly, all this time later, I mean, bipolar is like it's a nice shorthand that can help me explain some things to some people who already understand that language. But I don't really. I don't use it with my friends much. I don't really talk about myself as bipolar, like I am bipolar. And I think that there's a lot of, you know, like we're like, if you start from the place that the society that we're living in is sick, if you start from the place that shit is crazy out there, I don't know if you ever seen that Suicidal Tendencies video or the song, like, you know, Institutionalized, where he's like,
oh yeah, of course,
I'm not crazy, you're the one that's crazy. I mean, you know, on some level, like, I'm a grown-ass man, you know, not a teenager, like, yelling at my mom, and I'm still like, you know, it's not I'm not crazy, you're the one that's crazy. It's more just like the crazy, we are surrounded by the crazy. It is hard not to acknowledge the fact that shit is fucking crazy. And so you're telling me that I'm crazy, you know, like how, like, you know, like, I guess I would say it like this, and then I'll shut up and you could say something. But the thing that, when it comes down to it, like all these years later, I still take psych drugs. I still take a drug called lithium, and I've been taking it since I got out of LA County Jail like 18 years ago. And I find it really helpful. Like, I have a lot of friends who drink. I can't drink, you know, and I mean, people find their things that work for them. Like when I was young, when I was a teenager, like I would take drugs so that I could like explore other realities. At this point, I take drugs just so I can stay here. Like I just so I can stay here. Like I take drugs to sleep a lot of the time because that's like, I just want to be able to get up in the morning and be, you know, together enough to be able to engage with the day and not like have like the entire world pouring into my head. So my point being, I take psych drugs, but I don't take them because I think I have a mental illness. You know, I take them because I have superpowers and they help me control my superpowers.
Yeah, like Cyclops' visor.
Like Cyclops' visor, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Helps you hold it back when you need to.
Right.
And that's the one area where you and me are different, is the psych drugs, because like we both got similar experience with punk rock, and our conditions, what you know, are very similar. Also, like I have a diploma in agriculture from McGill.
Oh, no
I
shit.
live on a farm right now. It's like,
wow.
But when it comes to the meds, like, okay, meds helped me when I was totally psychotic and experiencing the end of the world and running around naked, bleeding, hadn't eaten or slept in months. Like, yes, I needed to get chained down to a bed and shot full of heavy sedatives. And there were some times I needed to be on Zyprexa and sleeping 23 hours a day because of where I'd ended up. But other than those moments where I'd hit, like other than when I needed to be brought back from psychosis, I've never found any meds that help me. They tried to put me on lithium, and I refused that one because in Quebec, you have to get blood work done every 3 months when you're on lithium. And I'm a hermit. Like, even now, I don't fucking leave my property. I have everything dropped off. Like, I live in my own fucking world. The real world's too much for me, so I'm just focusing on my imaginary world here and all these imaginary friends inside this magic portal. But the one I was on the longest was lamotrigine. I was on that mood stabilizer for a few years, but it's not that I ever found it helped. It was the only one that didn't cause side effects that really fucked me up. So I kept taking it. But when I finally weaned off of lamotrigine, I noticed I felt better once I was off it. And I think it was interfering with my sleep for a couple of years. So the only prescription I have that I fill and use is for a sleeping pill, Restoril. And I don't use them on a regular basis. Like, they're habit forming. So I've had that prescription for years, and I use them either when I need to or when I feel like it, because sedatives can be great. So sometimes I take them just to fucking mellow out and watch some movies. But I had to, my path, I was just one of those people where none of the psych meds worked. Antidepressants fucked me up. Mood stabilizers either did nothing or fucked me up. And so I had to excuse myself from the real world. And like after my second psychotic break, the government put me on permanent disability. I didn't even have to ask for it. And it's like, I don't have to fill anything out every month. There's no, like, the government is so happy that I'm just taking care of myself. I'm not a burden on the system. I'm not causing any problems. And I thought I was going to live my whole life at one point, like a total hermit. I opened up a bit and I let, family visit me sometimes. I've got an ex-wife and kids now. The kids come here. A few friends visit me, and over the past, 2 years, I started opening up online again. Like, I had been active in Icarus long ago, for quite a few years, but before messaging Andrew, I had removed myself completely from social media, so that I used my internet connection like a TV station, a radio station, and a library. I wasn't using it for social connection, but meeting Andrew opened up to meeting a few more people, led to me doing this. And so now, and this recently's basically turned, at the beginning of quarantine, I offered if people wanted more content and more shit during quarantine, that I would step up. And I was just coming out of my winter depression. And the channel's kind of turned into a full-time job since then.
What does that look like? What's the full-time job? I mean, and how many people look at it, and how many people engage with you? I'm super curious. I like this world of YouTube. The YouTube channels is like new for me. I haven't like explored it at all.
So the way this is for me is like at times my partner or one of our interns, we had 3 other people like working with the channel other than me and Ryan. At first, it just looked a lot like Ryan or one of them saying, hey, do you want to do this video? Do you want to do that? And I would just show up. Also, these interns only exist because I can barely use my computer. I couldn't set this stream up. I can't edit. So, and my partner, Ryan, isn't like that. They're just here to support me. So all it's looked like for me really is showing up to conversations or going live by myself. And when I'm live by myself, sometimes I'll discuss a topic, or other times I just share what I'm going through. So I've been on crying and suicidal. I've been on when I'm trying to control my anger. And then it's also expanded into, we do audience sessions sometimes where we have people from the audience on to record podcasts. Sometimes I have people write in for private sessions, and some of that will be they're suicidal, or they're, strongly, dangerously gifted, and they're needing help learning to handle that shit. Or sometimes it's people who want to explore the magic or spiritual shit I talk about, or people that want to explore their own psychology with my assistance. And so in private sessions, I often act like, and with different people, it's different, but sometimes I'm basically being a psychologist. Sometimes I'm basically being a priest. Other times I'm being a magician or a shaman. And sometimes I'm just being that peer counselor. And we've gotten some other decent podcasts. We've had Paul Vanderklay, pastor on YouTube. We've had Tim Freak, the famous philosopher. I just had Dr. Roran Emete on a little while ago, like a psychologist. We recorded 2 podcasts together. And then the other thing is, at the beginning of quarantine, I started doing watch parties as well. They usually start by we either watch a movie or 1 episode of a show, and then I just hang out and talk with the group. They last for between 4 to 7 hours.
Wow!
And those
so you watch it? You watch a film and then talk about it while you're watching it, or do you just watch it and then afterwards?
We watch it and discuss after, but then after also often has nothing to do with the show. Like
That's
sometimes.
so interesting. And then there's like a recording of it that someone could get.
No, that's all
live.
private and disappears. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like one night, James, one member of the community who's been on multiple podcasts, like he's in school for mathematics and he's really smart. So one night we ended up just all these really high IQ people discussing like math and the implications of the double slit experiment. Or another time someone came on who was really struggling at the moment and had some relationship issues, and it just turned into the whole group of 10 people spending a half hour talking them through what they're going through. Or sometimes it's someone bipolar who comes on to talk to me and is like, you know, Merc, I've been going through this or that. But at the parties, it's this weird thing where it turns into, and again, like there's usually a good sample of Icarus type people there. But there's also people that just completely stable, just they're interested in these subjects.
Huh. So interesting, man. I'm like, yeah, I feel like, you know, the world is, I mean, like, there's only so much you can focus on, you know? And I spent, like, those Icarus forums, I mean, that was like before social media even started, right? And then there was like, I put a bunch of years into moderating those forums. And then I have a pretty active Facebook presence, and I'm on Instagram and I'm on Twitter, but I don't really fuck with those as much. But I
don't use any of that at all. Like I do my shit through this channel here and that's it. Or we have a Discord. And actually, Shane, you should pop the link to the Discord in the chat. Yeah, so if anyone wants to message me for private sessions, or if you want to be at the like the watch parties, join our Discord. Okay, I got to use the washroom. Could you just talk to the audience about anything for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
And I'll be right back.
I could pop on for a second if you want me to, Mark.
Or yeah, you tag in for a minute, Shane. Sure, that's less or more professional than me just mentioning him in front of the audience. He doesn't know.
Yeah, if there was anything you wanted to talk to the audience about, I thought your story was like really, really good. Like all the, just it seems like you've got a good idea. Like you've ordered it pretty well. Like you've went through it.
My story? Yeah. I mean, everything I was telling you about, I'm 45 years old, man. So that shit that I was talking about in my 20s, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I went back to school. I went and got a master's in social work, and then I spent 4 years working in the public mental health system in New York City. And like, you know, I'm like really interested in, I have not lost my interest in shifting conceptions of mental health and mental illness. And I'm like really interested in the way the public mental health system works and how the mad underground, as I like to call it, can like influence the public system. So yeah, I mean, that story, it's good to, I guess it's, in general, you know, it's good to have a strong relationship to your narrative and know where you come from.
Yeah.
Because then, like, when you get smacked around by the world, which is inevitable, and you know how to land back in a place where, you know, you're still telling your story and, like,
right.
You're not, like, telling someone else's story, or, like, someone else is telling you what your story is.
Right.
I definitely know what my story is.
Yeah, dude, and it's great. I'm definitely interested in people's stories. That's yeah. So I was curious. I really like that conception, that idea of, you know, it's not so, it's like the world. I feel like a good starting place isn't so much that the world's, like, I think of it less as the world's sick and more like, that's one way you can look at it, but or more like it's crazy out there. Like when you're like, it helps you to know to be centered because things out there might not be.
Yeah, I mean, and we're all kind of connected. I mean, the thing is, one of the things in our society that I think they really get wrong is that this idea that we're just individuals, and that we, you know, if you have a problem, it's just your problem. I mean, the fact is that if you have a problem, anyone near you also has a problem. You know, like, where did that problem come from? It probably didn't just come from you. It probably came for like things happen because we're like, there's ways. I mean, I'll tell you, it's like super interesting. Like in the 1960s and 70s, there was a lot of competing ideas for what mental health and mental illness meant. And there was this movement called family therapy that developed in the 1960s, where like the idea was, if there was someone, you know, like me or Merc, who were like, you know, diagnosed bipolar or schizophrenic, you'd look at the person's situation, you'd look at their family and say, what's going on here that this person is going through this, you know? And rather than seeing psychosis as something that's just like an individual fault or an individual biological brain illness, psychosis is something that happens in the relationships between people. And we've kind of lost that. Like there in the 60s and 70s, there was all kinds of competing ideas for the ways we could think about ourselves. And in the 1980s, there was something called the rise of biopsychiatry. That was like when, in the United States, Ronald Reagan got elected, and it's when the DSM was published. And like that, there was like a cultural shift and a backlash. And all this time later, we people don't even know. Like, that's what happens. Like, the people who are in power get to tell the stories of how things went down. And in the 80s, they changed the whole story and said it was all about biological brain illness. And all this time later, it's 2020, and there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh yeah, mental illness is like it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. And that's just a story. It's another narrative. It's just a narrative that has a lot of power and money.
Have you read Shamans Among Us by Joseph Pulameni, I think?
Nah, I've never even heard of it. What is it?
He looks at, and he focuses on schizophrenia, not bipolar. But the most important aspect is the psychotic features. And so he talks about how this is most likely the exact same with bipolar, just he's focusing on schizophrenia. And he looked at it from an evolutionary point of view. And he, like, what he thought was, look, like, if the illness model were accurate, then we should have evolved away from this. What is it? Because it's all over the world. You know, it's not like some other diseases, it's just here or there, it's everywhere. And he looked back, and what he thinks it is that's the genetic function to create shaman. And he thinks it's there because it's an evolutionarily beneficial to our population to produce a small percentage of shaman. You don't want the whole society. And he saw that, but for him, it's all looking at it from the scientific point of view. Yeah. For me, from the phenomenological experience I've had, I would agree with it. And like one thing I found interesting, like looking into high magic or more advanced spiritual practices. Okay, I'll take, like, to not get confused by jumping around, I'll just use high magic. So the idea of the magician, or it's the same with the shaman, is that they have one foot in both worlds. They have one foot in the physical world, and they have one foot in the magical world. Now, for most people, you get into ritual magic to learn how to step one foot into the magical world. Whereas what I found is psychosis is that magical world. And you go into that unprepared, you're just going to destroy shit with it. Or you're going to have a horrible experience. But you can learn how to interact there. And so for me, often I think if we, instead of trying to get certain bipolar and schizophrenic people back to normal, we instead did the shamanic trainings, and it's learning how to stay grounded or how to choose when to step in. But you know that feeling when mania kicks really high and psychosis is like beginning to set in, like everything's on fire with meaning, reality's getting a little bit unreal. That's what normal people need to learn how to generate to do a magic ritual. Like that's what they plug into, that they experience just as magic because it's not wired into their brain the way it is for us. But what I found is when I do big magic rituals where I call up that energy, or sometimes even if I find that I'm a bit too manic, I'll do a large ritual. And by high magic, I mean it's about spiritual progression. I mean, I do some low magic. I've experimented with practical magic, and oddly, it all seems to work. But the main point is about getting in touch with your higher self, developing virtue, properly understanding your connection to the other world. But it's like, I go into basically a controlled psychotic state for hours. I exercise it, and there's an end to the ritual at a point. And that when I go to sleep after that, I wake up in the morning feeling kind of like you do when you wake up in the insane asylum, and it's like, fuck, suddenly you're back in the real world. Except it's not in the fucking hospital. I'm at home in my own bed, and that it was not only not destructive, but that it's beneficial. Like you get the spiritual or magical benefit of whatever it was you were doing. And it's kind of like exercising a pack of wild dogs, and they're well behaved for a while. Whereas I find psychosis that you haven't trained and you're not exercising, just it's like a pack of dogs that you left in a room all day. It'll start tearing shit apart.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. I think that's like I think that ability to be able to walk between worlds. I think it was Joseph Campbell that said, you know, the mystic swims in the water that the schizophrenic drowns in.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and phenomenologically, I found that to be true, at least for me.
I think it's worth noting. I don't know who's out there listening, you know, but I think it's worth noting that it can be a little problematic to make sweeping statements about something like, you know, the experience of psychosis or schizophrenia, because there's also like, you know, like when you say it's something that's been, you know, that happens, that you know, that people are born this way, and it's a genetic thing that, you know, we want a certain amount of you know, shamans in the society. It leaves out the part that for so many people, what gets called mental illness or like psychosis comes because really fucked up shit happened to them, and like really comes from trauma. And I feel like that's something that I didn't have when, I mean, you might find this interesting, like when we started the Icarus Project, that was at a point in the history in North America where the use of the word bipolar was like skyrocketing, because there were like these new antipsychotic drugs that were, you know, Risperdal and whatever, that were being prescribed for bipolar. So way more people were getting diagnosed bipolar too. The thing is that, you know, so many of those people and people who came to the Icarus Project forums and were talking, the stuff they were talking about, they'd gone through like really horrendous experiences, and I'm not convinced that a lot of them really, that the bipolar label was actually that useful. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that maybe we go through, the kind of elevated consciousness, and then the, you know, the depression, and like it's a very they're also symptoms of people who've had trauma, unresolved trauma.
Or one thing I like that Jordan Peterson says is he says sometimes it's depression and sometimes you have a shitty life. Like that not everyone who's experiencing depression, and for some people it's something chemical or spiritual or a combination or genetic. But for other people, it's like, no, you have a shitty job, your spouse beats you, your kids don't like you, you know, it's just, you're not depressed, you just have a shitty life. Or some people it is that they're schizophrenic or bipolar, or, you know, special or touched or a natural shaman. For other people, it's they've been fucking abused, or, you know, something in their life.
But like who gets to decide that, you know? When you know, we were when you went to go piss or whatever, we were talking about like the power of narrative and our personal, like how important our stories are that we tell. Who gets to make that decision about whether it's like someone, like if someone like frames themselves. I mean, I think we just need to find ways. There's so many ways you get beaten down in this society that like being able to like if someone wants to be like, yeah, I'm special and I'm, you know, like I'm not going to tell them they're not, you know, like I think it's more complicated than that. It's more complicated than our individual lives. You know, I'm curious. You've mentioned Jordan Peterson a couple of times now, and the only context I know that guy in is that he's like, you know, he's really anti-trans, and that he's like a really like.
So Jordan Peterson's the way I came across Andrew, and for me, I came across him before all the trans stuff blew up, and I was interested. I came across a lecture of his on Jungian depth psychology, and so that. His political stuff really doesn't interest me. And the stuff he talks about on mainstream programs is not what he's best for. Like his psychology's excellent. His his point on trans was just they were passing a law that you had to by law call people the pronoun they requested. And his point was just no, the government cannot tell me what I have to say. He's not anti-trans at all. He's been smeared as anti-trans, but he's standing up against some people using trans issues to push. I was trying
to make sense of him because I mean I'm like very like the queer and trans community is like I feel like I'm like the token straight guy like amongst my friends and I think there's
it's unfortunate Peterson's like presented as anti-trans because he's just not, and his deep psychological stuff, like his maps of meaning, like and those university lectures are on YouTube. Maps of meaning, fucking brilliant. Anyone, no matter what gender or sex you are, like assuming you're the higher intellect who's interested in psychology, you're going to get a lot out of it. Same thing with his introduction to personality.
I watched it. It's cool. It's good to hear you. It's good to get your perspective. I watched
but like I just want to say this really clearly in case someone else, like, yes, this channel's tied to Jordan Peterson, but there's nothing transphobic here. We're not excluding anyone. It's very close to Icarus rules as well. Like you talked about how powerful story is. I feel we each have the right to define our own story, but also I don't give a shit how other people define it. So I know some people see me as a spiritual teacher, and there's other people out there who see me as just like a crazy person who should not be listened to. That's fine. Each person can choose what I am to them, and I'm not going to let it affect my story.
Right.
But like here, it's everybody's welcome, but we're not interested in arguing about whose story is right here. We're interested in sharing our experiences with each other and helping each other grow and individuate on our own paths.
Yeah. Well, like with Icarus, you know, I mean, I think the ability to have a space feel open enough that people can actually share their experiences sometimes means you have to set some boundaries because there's like people who don't get stuff, and for people who look like you and I, who like are white men especially, there's like a way that there's all these things that for all the things that we see and understand about the world, there's a bunch of shit that's hard to understand when you're a white man. And I think that's like I'm really curious. I mean, the Jordan Peterson thing. Have you heard of ContraPoints?
Yes. I did see. Sorry, is it her?
Yeah.
ContraPoint. Okay, yeah. So I did see her response to Peterson, but it was a long time ago, and I'm not remembering what her arguments about him were.
Yeah. It was deep. I mean, I think but one thing I remember, because it was a while for me too, was she was saying, you know, there's a lot of young men out there in the society that like really need just strong male voices to be able to like guide them, you know, because in our family structures are all broken down, and you know, and I just think that's really interesting. I mean, I think for me to like take it away from ContraPoints or Jordan Peterson or whatever and just talk about our experiences. I think because my dad died when I was young, I've always sought out older male figures who could teach me shit. Like that's been kind of a thing because I've like sought out mentors, and now I'm at this point in my life where I have a bunch of mentor figure people in my life, or like my friends, but also it's like clear there's like they're older and teaching me. And then I'm also a mentor to a bunch of people. And I feel like there's something about that, like that replicates the family structure that I didn't have. That's like, that works, that I think that's like I need that. I need to feel that I'm both like have people I can look to, and also that I'm like a person that can like help other people. So
I often along my journey wanted the mentor figure, or also when you look into a lot of spiritual practices and whatnot, it says that, your guru or your teacher or whatnot appears when you're ready. And I kept wanting that. And instead, every time I went to get that, the person would just treat me like an equal. And eventually, as I learned to fine tune my connection, like my personal story is from above. I was told like, no, sorry, you just don't get a mentor. You're meant to do it this way. And I've had a bunch of times, especially when you're suicidally depressed, wanting to kill yourself, where you're just screaming, like literally screaming and crying to God to send you help. The answer I would get is, no, you got to learn to go through this on your own, because that's what you're meant to do. So I had that different, but at the same time, my dad's still alive. He lives on the farm right over. I can count on him. Like, I'm not handy, so when something goes wrong around the house, it's my dad, or my mom and dad drop off all my groceries. But my dad's a very grounded, real world person. He's a farmer. He doesn't know anything, about this spirituality or psychology or whatnot. So I never had that spiritual mentor, or like even the mentor from the psychological perspective. I had to go through it in my own fucked up way, and my story is that I had to learn how to do it the natural way. That God and enlightenment is there for everyone. And even if you're somewhere where there's no one around you that can teach you a thing, that it's discoverable if you're meant to. And so while I've gotten tons of help along my way, most of the shit I know and talk about, and like I didn't learn much from Peterson. I learned his way of framing it, and I learned lots of details that back it. But I didn't learn the actual principles that I like from him. I enjoyed him because he articulated the things I learned from my psychosis, my depression, and my own mystic experiences. So I've gone through it in a very, very strange way.
Right on.
And
well,
I feel like it's kind of a joke too. Like, to me, it's ridiculous that I'm here doing this with you now. And I find, like, if I were to write out my autobiography and you presented it as fiction that was supposed to be realistic, I feel like people would say this story isn't realistic. Like, the true story to me does not seem realistic. Right down to like the way I took over this, or the reason I'm doing this channel. Because a fucking angel told me to talk to someone. And it's like, that's even what I told him. And that just interested him. And then he still comes back for advice from my angel. Because the other thing is my psychotic delusion, I'm lucky because I've had friends who, when they go psychotic, they think they're taken over by Satan and they're ready to kill people. I got really lucky in that my delusion's a reliable motherfucker. Like, that angel doesn't steer me wrong. It's fucking weird.
Right on. Well, listen, man, ask me anything else you want to ask me, because it's getting towards the top of the hour and I'm going to have to get back to my life.
I actually have nothing in particular, though. We never did any questions. Shane, were there any questions for Sascha? Yeah, I'm not going to try to go through anything. I'll see if Shane pops up any audience questions. But But just before, while he's taking a look at that, anything you have going on now that you want to promote?
Well, I have a few things going on. So I run a training institute called the Institute for the Development of Human Arts that's based in New York City. And we do trainings for people who are working in the mental health system, for people who are just trying to figure out their life. And IDA grew out of the Icarus Project, and it's a mix of service users, like people like you and I, and then family members of service users, and then clinicians. And so those three groups of people, and we do these trilogue events where we bring, the idea is to bring a bunch of different voices into a space and open up space for dialogue. It's like Icarus, but it's like we're bringing in family members and clinicians, and it's cool. I mean, so people should look out for IDA. I mean, idha-nyc.org. And then I have a project that I've been running for the last number of years called TMAPs, or Transformative Mutual Aid Practices. And it's like, I don't know if you remember from back in the day with Icarus, we called it Mad Maps back then, but it's basically like a set of questions that people ask each other to figure out very basic things like, what does it look like when I'm doing well? What does it look like when I'm struggling? What are the things I need to do to take care of myself? Who are the people in my life I can turn to? And by going through this process and writing the things down, the idea is that we build mutual aid networks, and that as the coronavirus, has shook up so many people all over the world, I've been doing TMAPS groups on Zoom with I just got done doing 3 cohorts of 10 to 12 people who, for a month-long thing, once every week, a couple hours, going through the TMAPS, the TMAPS questions, and people getting to know each other and building trust. And so you can find that on TMAPS, TMAPS, community.net, and you can find the tool on there. Okay. And then finally, I have a private practice. I went back to school and got a master's in social work, and then spent with young people diagnosed with psychotic disorders. And I got pretty burnt out from doing that, and I got pretty fed up. And so I moved to California, and now I have a practice where I see people. But you can find, my name is Sascha DuBrul. SASCHADUBRUL.com, and that's where you can find all the information about all that shit.
Yeah, we have the links in the description. There's those links you sent.
Probably spelled like.
Cool. So yeah, that's what's going on with me. I mean, that's like, I'm really interested in building movements of people who can take better care of each other. And I think that's missing. I mentioned it at the beginning, but I came up on the Lower East Side, in the squatters movement, and then all that traveling. And I mean, I was doing political activism the whole time, and being part of social movements where people were super engaged. But so much of the engagement was really, a lot of it was fueled by trauma, a lot of times when you've been traumatized, a lot of activists, they're activists because they're active, and it's hard to stop and slow down or whatever. So I think a lot of the work I've been doing for years is trying to find people who are engaged in changing the world and help them take better care of each other. Oh, last thing. Me and my friend Jax, the person I talked about who I started the Icarus Project with, we have a podcast called So Many Wings, a flock of misfits and change makers. And if you go to So Many Wings,
That's right. I think this is gonna end
you
in
know,
like
.org, I guess.
5-10 minutes. Is that
You'll
cool?
find the podcast.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's what I got going on.
That's fantastic. And yeah, the community here, I would say sort of the difference between it and some of the other stuff you talked about is just there's nothing activist here, whereas this is the place to work on changing the world through being the change. And so we don't work on anything activist or argue about society at all. The idea here is like whatever your surrounding is, hey, how can we help you adjust to what you're going through? And so it's all about personal transformation and empowering others just without any politics or any of that. But the nice thing about here is that it's not like just some of those support groups where it's just all people who are mentally ill or whatever the framework is. There's a good amount of people here that are just interested in these subjects on, you know, self-improvement, but not because they have any major psychiatric disorder. So if anyone new does come across this who's just used to the Icarus type format, if you join our Discord, you'll find there are a lot of very quote unquote normal people who are really going to enjoy that you exist, and that everyone here is really open-minded about what we go through. Those of us who go through bizarre phenomenon, there's a lot of people here who are just genuinely interested in that and what it can teach them about the human condition.
Awesome. Well, I'll join and, you know, check it out.
And if you want sometime in the future, because you've got your partner Jax and I've got my partner Ryan, maybe we could have like we could do this again sometime in the future where you bring Jax and Ryan shows up too, and the four of us could have a discussion sometime.
Jax has a toddler and is like, you know, we have,
Did you start?
you know, 2 1-hour slots a week where we work on
My partner practice and he's in school.
Could it have been me?
So yeah,
you know,
same
deal.
way.
All right, to get a chance to chat with you guys, and you know, looking forward to connecting in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. If you ever have anything to promote or just you're bored, let me know. I'll have you on absolutely anytime. This was fantastic.
Awesome. All right, man. Goodbye.
All right, thanks a lot.
Take
Bye.
care.
So Shane,
Un momento.
we didn't get around, and if you're talking, I can't hear you. We didn't get around to answering anyone. Are there any questions I should answer? Like you want to stay on even though Sasha's gone?
Yeah, my
Or are we already off? I can't tell whether I'm live or not. So if I'm being streamed right now,